A Peacebuilder's Life, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Robert Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. Throughout history, combatants have shared the battleground with those seeking to identify and implement a mutually acceptable resolution to the conflict. The process of helping opposing sides find a solution to the issues that divide them has evolved from a series of parallel but isolated efforts across multiple disciplines into a more holistic enterprise known as peacebuilding. The development of peacebuilding as a discrete field over the last several decades has been a defining element of today's guest's career. Charles Dambach is President and CEO of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, a network of private and public organizations dedicated to building sustainable peace and security worldwide. He has previously served as the CEO of the National Peace Corps Association. His work as a frontline practitioner has included assignments in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and among combatants in the civil war in the Congo. His recently published memoir, Exhaust the Limits: The Life and Times of a Global Peacebuilder, chronicles both his work and the growth and recognition of peacebuilding as an important part of the policymaker's toolkit. CHIC, welcome to International Focus.
Thank you, Rob.
Welcome back to International Focus.
My pleasure.
So, CHIC, in reading the book, you chronicle all these various phases of your life and activities and really amazing kind of experiences. But the word peacebuilder, which is in the subtitle of the book and we talked about in our intro, is a label you put on your career at the more toward the latter part than the beginning part. So I'm wondering if you could talk about at what point did you sort of decide, hey, I'm a peacebuilder?
Well, for one thing, the term peacebuilding, I don't think anybody was using when I was growing up, so I did not go to school to say I want a career as a peacebuilder. It was not a career path at that time. What happened in my life was several things that just sensitized me to issues of violence and conflict, and early on started developing a philosophy that just grew and developed through a very meandering career path, doing a lot of completely what would appear to be unrelated things. I think they're related, but most people would say, how did you get from this point to that point to that point? Sports, the arts, health, community development, international relations. It's pretty. I think my parents would call it a checkered past. I would prefer to call it an interesting, a diversified past. But early on, a racial experience when I was in college really sensitized me to some of these issues. And the first chapter describes what happened to one of my teammates. I played football at Oklahoma State, and a black kid on the team was literally tortured. And it really shook me to the core and sensitized me to some of that kind of issue. And that's where I started to think, I got to do something.
What was the core? But what was it about you that it sort of brought to life for you?
Yeah, that's hard to say. I think probably my upbringing with my family that certainly had just basic core fundamental values that said you treat people fairly. And this guy was not treated fairly. It was horrific what happened to him. And so it just ran totally counter to my fundamental core values. And then the war in Vietnam came along, and I started off being ready to go kill the commies, because that's what you did. But I was on the debate team. I'm one of the few people that's on a varsity football team and varsity debate team at a major school, but that's another story. But we started studying the war in Vietnam for the debate program, and I began to find out, wait a second, this is a colossal mistake. So then I started to say, well, then we've got to do something to try to stop that. And then just kind of took, well, if that war is a mistake, what about the rest of them? And began to recognize that at least in my own way of thinking, that the whole concept of using violent force to achieve one's political or theological or economic ends just is not a reasonable, rational, or acceptable thing to do. And that philosophy just kind of developed and emerged over the years. And then late in my career, after being at the Peace Corps Association and getting directly involved in Ethiopian-Eritrea border war, the Congo Civil War, and about that time, the peacebuilding field was emerging, the terminology, the language, and the skill sets were developing, and so I found that, well, that's what I am. So I kind of emerged and fell into it, and then discovered the terminology for what I had already become.
Well, it seems like, I mean, people wouldn't think that playing college football, or necessarily even being on the college varsity debate team, were, you know, career paths or preparation for being a peace builder, as we might now think about it. But what it seemed to do was it formed the ethos of the values of a peace builder. Was that kind of the?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, football's pretty combative, and even debate is combative. It's just not using physical violence, but you sure try to beat your opponent.
Right.
But yeah, the thing that did happen, even in the football program, even though it's controlled violence on a field, there certainly is a collegiality among your teammates, but even with your opponents. Mm-hmm. You develop a respect for your opponents, and you really don't. You want to beat them, but you don't want to hurt them. You don't want to destroy them. Right. And you know, one of the things that comes up in our field a lot is a lot of people refer to what we do is conflict prevention, and I object to that term. I don't have a problem with conflict. Mm-hmm. Conflict's kind of fun. Mm-hmm. Life would be boring if we didn't have conflict, and it's how we progress. You know, we have conflicting ideas, and they compete with one another, and finally, hopefully, the better one emerges. So conflict isn't the problem. It's how you deal with the conflict, and do you deal with it in a positive and constructive way, which dialogue and debate is, or do you try to destroy the other one, which is when you start turning to violence, then you're turning destructive, and that's just wrong.
I'm struck in how you described your sort of experiences at Oklahoma State, and how you described the experiences and working between the governments in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and the two phrases you said that I think are common to both. One is respecting for each other. And the other one was what you'd said in reference to the Vietnam War, that war wasn't the answer. Yeah. To talk, let's fast forward. Let's go forward to your talk some about your how you got involved in being a go-between between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and how these same concepts kind of played out in that experience.
Well, I had developed that philosophical approach. I was strongly influenced by a college professor who I dedicate the book to, named Dale Stockton, who happened to be murdered very early in his career, just terribly traumatic experience for me. But he taught me the value of listening to other people and respecting other people. He was a communications professor, and he said, you don't start to communicate until you listen to the other person and respect the other person. Mm-hmm. That's where communication really begins. So it kind of developed from that, and that value set and that way of dealing with situations and dealing with people had been deeply ingrained and then just cultivated throughout my career. No matter what I was doing, that set of values and way of doing things was developed. But the real opportunity to put into real meaningful practice was with regard to the Ethiopia-Eritrea border war, where my involvement in it began with my good friend John Garamendi, who's now a member of Congress. But John had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Ethiopia, had been Deputy Secretary of Interior in the Clinton administration. The war broke out. He called me one day and said, "CHIC, my friends are killing each other, and we've got to do something about it." And I hadn't a clue as to what we could do about it, but it's very well. Let's give it a try. You know, it's kind of the spirit that John and I both have, just kind of this can do. Let's just see what we can do. So we got involved. But the thing we were able to do is build a trust and respectful relationship with the leaders, the top leaders, the heads of state, on both sides. Partly because of the Peace Corps connection. They had both been taught by Peace Corps volunteers, held the Peace Corps in high esteem, so that gave us instant credibility. But the other thing that we found, because a whole lot of people trying to work with them, and they ended up working more with us than with anybody. And we were the ones on the phone with them when they stopped the war. Right. So pretty significant situation. But I'm convinced that in addition to the Peace Corps part of it, the reason we were able to be trusted by both sides and play the major role we were able to play is that they recognized that we didn't come in telling them what to do and how to solve their problem. Mm-hmm. I think everybody else did. I talked to so many people say, oh, if they would just do this, this, and this, then everything would be fine. Well, we didn't go in saying, here's what you need to do to stop the war. We came in saying, why are you fighting? What are you trying to accomplish? And understanding and respecting what they said was the reason they were fighting, on both sides, respecting it, but making sure that each side understood we were doing the same thing with the other guys. And there were sometimes each side would say, well, you're siding with the other guys. And no, we're doing exactly the same thing with them as we're doing with you. We're listening, we understand and respect, but we want to help you also understand what their position is so that we can find a reasonable accommodation that will put an end to the use of violence.
What was, in your view, what was the tipping point for the two leaders and obviously the bureaucracies that they represented? What was the tipping point that said, hey, maybe the way we're doing it is not the right way to do it?
Well, I think there are two things. One of them was beyond our control. Bill Zartman, as you know, writes about the ripeness of a conflict at reaching a point where the adversaries are willing to bring it about. And this thing went on for a couple of years, and from our perspective certainly didn't need to, but it did reach that point where they were just recognizing, this has gone on long enough, too long. But I would like to think, and we have reason to believe, that they reached that point sooner than they would have otherwise were it not for our involvement. And in fact, the letter that we got from Meles Zenawi, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, credited us with creating the spirit and the momentum, that made the agreement possible. And what we did was simply press a case over and over and over again that at the end of the day, it was a border war. At the end of the day, the determination of where the border belongs will not be determined on a battlefield. It'll be determined by an independent commission. Both sides knew that. The question is, how many people are going to die between now and the time you let the commission do that work? And one of the things that I was bold enough to do, I guess not having official standing, I shouldn't have really looked these heads of state in the eye and pressed these questions, but I would, and say, they would give reasons that they had to keep fighting. They'd say, how many people have to die over that one? 5,000, 10,000, 20,000? How many people are going to die over that reason? And nobody ever asked them that kind of question before. And so, they would have to stop and think about it, say, well, gee, maybe it's not worth very many lives.
Right.
Maybe it's not worth any lives.
Right.
Over that issue. That issue can be resolved without people dying over it. So I think that it was those two things, and I think they would agree that it was those two things that caused it to reach the end when it did. It would have ended eventually, whether we were involved or not, but there is good reason to believe that it ended sooner because we were there pressing that case and building the spirit and the momentum that helped make it possible.
We have about a minute before the break, Chicken, and we can pick up with this after the break. But how would you define what a peace builder is? I mean, based on, so you've seen your career progress, and I know it meant very different things, say, in the 1960s than it means in 2011. But what's the basic definition of what is a peace builder?
Well, I think I put that into two categories. There are those for whom peace building is a career. You're one of them. Where it's really what you focus on, specifically focusing on trying to find ways to resolve conflicts without resorting to the use of violence. But there are many dimensions to conflict environments, and anybody who can be working in the health field, they can be working in the environmental field, in governance, in business. If you are cognizant of the importance of finding reasonable resolutions without resorting to violence and helping in whatever environment that is to work through conflicts and challenges and difficulties, then you're a peace builder.
It's having that ethos that you talked about at the beginning and
Yeah.
applied in these very, very different
That's
ways.
right.
We're coming up on our break. We'll be back in just a moment on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking with Charles CHIC Dambach about his life as a peace builder and as captured in your book, Exhausted Limits. I suppose holding it up is not ever a bad thing to be doing as an author.
You should hold it up the whole time.
Right.
And the website and everything else.
So you can Google it, you can find it.
Amazon.com is the easiest way,
to go. So CHIC, before we were talking about what a peace builder is, and we talked about it's wanting to use these various skills and capacities for the purpose of finding respectful, cooperative, peaceful solutions to important problems. Now, if you had been in a similar place in your career as you were when John Garamendi called you prior to your involvement in Ethiopia, Eritrea, but had called you, if that had happened, say, in the 60s, my guess is you guys wouldn't have been able to get access to heads of. So what changed? I mean, what is it that changed or is changing about peace building?
Well, part of it is we were more mature and at that time, sure. but there is something else that is happening globally. Is an emergence of civil society, private citizens becoming part of the I guess we refer to it as multi-track diplomacy, track 2 diplomacy, but we extend beyond track 2 to multiple tracks of diplomacy, where it's not just the official diplomats and the military and heads of state that are actively engaged in conflict resolution anymore. There is a really remarkable phenomenon of private citizens, citizen-based organizations getting directly involved and basically saying nation states have really screwed it up by feeling that it is their right and their prerogative to use violence to advance their causes. And that's always been the way it is. There is a really remarkable phenomenon just within the last 2 or 3 decades of literally hundreds, even thousands of civil society, citizen-based organizations emerging to say, we're part of this game too, and we're representing the people who are destroyed by the use of violent force, and we're ready to stand up and say, enough, let's put an end to this. There is no reasonable basis for any nation state to use violence to advance its cause, and so we're going to step up and become players in that. So that was starting to happen at the time we got involved with that, and so there was a willingness on the part of not just the ambassadors, not just the foreign ministers, but the heads of state to meet with these private citizens and give us access and an opportunity to play a role in it. I think 3, 4, 5 decades ago, they would have said, who are you? Mm-hmm. What right do you have? What reason do we have to even talk to you at all? Now they do.
Right. So if we look at, there are a lot of people who will say, hey, I've heard your story of Ethiopia, Eritrea, or they read about in the book, or your experiences in Congo, and that peace process. Say, hey, I want to do that. That's what I want to be able to do with my career. So what's the advice to that person now? Because while it is more of an institutionalized field, like you're saying, it's more regularized now that non-governmental people can be involved, and you can become a part of a government, I suppose, as well. But there still is not necessarily a recruiter who comes to your campus and says, I'm recruiting peace builders. I mean, what's the advice for people who want to do this kind of work?
Well, I get about 5 emails a day from people asking me that question, and I wish I could give an answer to say, here's what you do, and it will happen, and you will be able to write a book saying you helped bring peace to a given country. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. There are far more people wanting to do this than there are opportunities to do it. I feel so lucky, and I think you do as well, with the kind of work that you do. I feel so lucky. I just happened into it to get to do this really neat stuff, and a lot of people find out about it and say, wow. And I look in the mirror and say, wow, I cannot believe that I had the opportunity to do this. But it did. It just happened to me. And so I wrote about it to let people know that it can be done, that private citizens can make this kind of a difference. But in their own way, everybody can be a part of this whole system of building a more peaceful world, beginning simply with an attitudinal change of recognizing that it can be done. The main thing I used to run into, much less so now, used to run into is people saying, CHIC, you naive fool. People have always gone to war, they always will go to war, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, I hope everybody watching this program will never make that statement, because it's not true. Yes, people have always gone to war, but that doesn't mean they always will. We've had a whole lot of diseases that were around for millennia, And then medicine figured out how to cure them. Well, peace builders are figuring out how to cure violent conflict. That's what we're all about. And it, just as diseases can be cured, violence can be cured. It can be done. Will we totally eliminate warfare in my lifetime? Probably not. But we've already made a huge progress. The frequency and severity of violent conflict is down dramatically. So it starts just with an attitude of people saying, okay, maybe I won't be able to meet with the heads of state that are at war with each other and get them to agree to stop. Probably not.
Right.
But I can be part of a growing change in attitude here in the United States and worldwide of recognizing the inappropriateness and even the futility of the use of violent force as a way of resolving intractable differences. It can affect the way I vote in elections. It can affect what I do where I work. If you're a teacher, you can start conveying this message to the students in the workplace, at the water fountain, or over coffee. And to read about it and learn about it and just help build a global, what Boutros Boutros-Ghali talked about as wanting to build a culture of peace, a global culture of peace. And I think that is a role that everybody can play. A few can do it as part of a career path. Some can do it as in working in related fields, in health, the environment, governance, and so on, where you just make building peace a part of your mindset of what you're trying to accomplish with that, and then a very small portion will be able to actually do what you and I are privileged to do, to directly work with adversaries and try to get them to resolve their differences. We
were talking a little before about the growing recognition, the U.S. government and their quadrennial defense review and review of development and so on, and the policy, and a recognition that peace building is important. You mentioned the system. So what is that system now, this sort of peace building system?
Well, I view it kind of in concentric circles. The core of the peace building system is the conflict resolution community, the people who are trained and have expertise in that and are able to work directly with either the top level adversaries or at the grassroots level where there are communities that are hostile toward one another. So that's the core of it. But conflict environments are almost always multifaceted. There's several things that drive it. There are core causes of it. So the system then is to look at those things. It can be ethnic, it can be historical, it can be resource-based. You and I have both been involved in the Congo where there are just a whole lot of real valuable minerals. And it's not the only thing driving conflict there, but it's certainly one of the things that drives it. So you look at those whatever in any given environment may be the drivers, the causes of the violent conflict. So you try to identify and understand those and understand who then is identified with the various adversarial groups and kind of find what their hot buttons are, what you can push to get them to recognize that there's a better way to maybe not achieve everything they want to achieve, but at least achieve something reasonable without the death and the destruction. And I have to slip in one of the lines that I like to use now, and it is very appropriate in our work, is that almost all conflicts anymore are resolved at the negotiating table. It's very, very rare that there's conquest, somebody waves the right flag, and terms of surrender. Right. When do you ever hear about terms of surrender? You just don't. It's a negotiated settlement. The point I like to make, and I did this with the heads of state, Ethiopia and Eritrea, and as you know, with the guys in the Congo, is at the end of the day, there's going to be a negotiated settlement. The only question is how many people die between now and the time you reach a negotiated settlement. Let's bypass the death and the destruction and go to the negotiated settlement. It'll probably be virtually the same now as it would be after you've killed a whole lot of people and destroyed a whole lot of property.
Right.
Let's just bypass the warfare and get on with negotiating.
And in terms of U.S. policy, what's happened in that realm? And we just had the QDDR came out, this big sort of policy review and sort of blueprint for the future. What is the role of peace building in that?
Well, it's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. The QDDR, Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Review, a comprehensive analysis of how this country relates to the rest of the world with regard to development and diplomacy, recognized for the first time ever the primacy of conflict and violence and how destructive it is, not just to the places where it happens, but to our ability to function in a positive way in the rest of the world. And so it is said, henceforth, trying to prevent and mitigate violent conflict around the world is a fundamental part of U.S. foreign policy. And I read that, and we were strong advocates for it to try to get that in there and to try to get it on the legislative side as well. But we just saw that come out and just took a deep breath and said, wow.
And the we there is the Alliance for Peacebuilding.
The Alliance for
Peacebuilding. Maybe just
Peacebuilding.
take a minute and talk about the Alliance.
Happily, since you're my new board chair.
Self-interested question.
For both of us. The Alliance for Peacebuilding is a network of now some 70 organizations that are involved with conflict prevention and resolution, peace builders. And part of what we're doing now is making the case to government officials and to others that this is really important, that development, if you're interested in development, in overcoming hunger and poverty, well, the correlation between violence and the inability of some societies to overcome hunger and poverty is incontrovertible. Everybody knows it. And so now, finally, we're saying, okay, then we've got to do something about that. So it's brand new in U.S. foreign policy, and it's really exciting and extraordinary.
Charles CHIC Dambach, thanks for the show from the Alliance for Peacebuilding and also author of Exhaust the Limits. To our viewers, we'll see you next week on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website.